Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into some really dense source material. It's challenging stuff. We're looking at critiques covering, well, everything from Marxist theory to settler colonial history, right up to modern political issues. These texts, they're pretty vast. They try to diagnose why life, within the current system often feels so empty, meaningless even. But our mission here isn't just to get stuck in the critique, is it?
No, absolutely not.
Our goal is to sift through all this complexity, find a few core truths, something that gives us a kind of revolutionary counter logic. Because for you listening right now, maybe you're dealing with depression or nihilism or just finding it hard to live authentically, creatively in a world that feels designed to crush that. Well, we're looking for a clear path, something actionable, a way to find purpose. Okay, let's unpack this. The sources kick on by saying that your internal struggle, that feeling of futility, it's not actually your failing, not a personal weakness.
Right. That's a key starting point. It's presented as a logical response, almost a healthy one in a way, to a dysfunctional structure.
So these texts aren't just complaining, they're like maps, showing us where the real problems lie, the foundational issues.
And crucially, where hope might be hidden. Collective hope.
It shifts the focus immediately, doesn't it?
It really does. What's fascinating here is how quickly the sources try to externalize that struggle, move it outwards. So we stop thinking of meaninglessness as some internal flaw, like, a lack of willpower or something.
Right.
And start seeing it as a symptom of a systemic issue, a pathology within the system itself.
And these systems, the sources argue, they actually benefit from that feeling.
That's the core argument. They suggest these systems thrive on isolation, on alienation. That's how they maintain control. So finding purpose, fighting back against nihilism, instantly becomes a collective act, a political act even.
Okay.
So this whole deep dive, it's really tailored to give you, the listener, a clear diagnosis, something you can work with. The idea is to move from feeling like a victim of chaos to having a clear target, a focus for, well, constructive resistance. Understanding the bad guys aren't just people, but structures.
Okay, part one then. The diagnosis. Let's talk about this idea of alienation and what the sources call the auto-cannibalistic system. Sounds pretty intense. They start by framing Western society, especially the American project, using this concept, the cult of empire, rooted in settler colonialism. What exactly do they mean by a decentralized cult?
Right, it's a powerful framing. The argument is that the system operates like a massive cult, but without a single obvious leader like you might expect. It started, they say, by recruiting people from the margins in Europe, the poor or social outcasts, people with nothing left to lose.
Okay.
And it offered them something powerful, a new identity, the settler, belonging, a fresh start. Think Manifest Destiny, that kind of energy.
But there was a catch.
A huge one. The price was total allegiance, and crucially, cutting ties with old cultures, old loyalties. It's described as social dissociation on a grand scale, severing roots to plant new ones in service of the empire.
But if it's a cult, who's the leader? You said decentralized. We have presidents, governments, CEOs. They change all the time.
Exactly. That's the decentralization. The sources argue the real, enduring deity isn't a person. It's capital itself, an abstract force.
Capital as a god?
Pretty much. Presidents, politicians, corporate leaders. They're just temporary priests. High priests, maybe, but still serving the doctrine. And that doctrine is simple, relentless: growth, reproduction, accumulation. Always more.
Right.
The sources reference Saskia Sassen here, the sociologist.
Yeah.
She compares it to a cancer cell. It must grow to survive, even if it kills the host. Human cost is secondary to the system's need to expand.
Wow. Okay. So what does this mean for the individual, for the listener trying to make art or just get by or find meaning?
Well, this is where it becomes deeply personal, right? The sources contend that the worker, and that's basically anyone who provides labor, whether it's physical, creative, emotional, you are the primary commodity.
We're the fuel.
You're the fuel. Your time, your energy, your creativity. It's all harnessed to feed this relentless demand for growth. Your labor power is what the system consumes.
So the struggle to live a life that isn't just about being a commodity, a life with authentic purpose, that's a direct challenge to the cult's core belief.
Precisely. It's a material struggle against the system's fundamental logic. It pits your need for self-actualization against capital's need for accumulation.
Okay, that sets up the next big piece. Alienation. We throw that word around a lot, but these sources go back to Marx's original idea from 1844. It's specific. How do they break it down?
Yeah, Marx's concept is really foundational here. He identified 4 main types of alienation that arise specifically from capitalism. First, you're alienated from the product of your labor. You make something, maybe pour your heart into it, but you don't own it. You don't control its destiny. It belongs to someone else.
Like building a beautiful table you can't afford to buy.
Exactly. Or writing code for software you have no say over. Second, alienation from the act of labor itself. The work isn't fulfilling your human potential. It feels external, forced, something you have to do, not something that expresses who you are.
The daily grind feeling.
Precisely. Third, and this is maybe the deepest, alienation from our human nature. Marx called it Gattungswesen, or species being. Our innate drive to create freely, to connect, to shape our world meaningfully. That gets stunted. Commodification replaces creation.
Okay.
And finally, alienation from other humans. Instead of community and cooperation, the system pits us against each other. We see colleagues as rivals, competitors for scarce jobs or promotions, not as fellow beings.
So we're cut off from our work, ourselves, our nature, and each other. That's comprehensive alienation.
It is. And the sources argue this isn't just an unfortunate side effect. It's not a bug. It's a feature, a tool for control.
How does our isolation strengthen this system? Seems counterintuitive.
Well, here's where that auto-cannibalistic idea comes back in. This system actually metabolizes its own crises. It finds ways to profit from the problems it generates.
Right.
And alienation, that feeling of being fractured, isolated, anxious, maybe depressed, that's an ideal state for maintaining control, according to this view.
Why?
Because if you're feeling disconnected, questioning your own worth, maybe even your own sanity, you're far less likely to look outwards. You're less likely to connect with others and say, hey, maybe the problem isn't me, maybe it's the system.
So my depression, my anxiety, it keeps me quiet. Keeps me from joining with others.
That's the argument. It keeps the focus inward, on self-blame, on personal failure, on trying to fix yourself within the broken system, rather than directing that energy outward towards structural critique and collective action.
Wow.
And the sources point to the most horrific outcome of this breakdown.
Mass violence.
Things like mass shootings are analyzed not just as individual acts of madness, but as ritualistic expressions. Yeah, like horrifying rituals expressing the system's inherent violence, the logic of disposability, of human life being cheap, taken to its extreme by the ultimate alienated subject, someone completely disconnected, acting out the system's underlying death drive.
That's incredibly dark. And terrifyingly, the system even profits from that.
That's the autocannibalism. The sources argue these tragedies become simultaneously symptoms and commodities, macroeconomic commodities.
Wow.
The terror they generate fuels demand. Demand for guns, for security systems, for police funding, private security firms. The whole security industry booms. Capital accumulates from the tragedy.
So fear drives demand, which makes future violence more likely in a grim way, and the cycle feeds itself, profiting from our worst nightmare.
Exactly. It's a self-perpetuating cycle where human desperation and death become literal fuel for economic growth in certain sectors.
Okay, that's the extreme terrifying symptom. But the sources also detail the everyday, more mundane ways the system keeps most of us, well, pacified. The bread and circuses idea. They call it the sweat MSO framework.
Right. SWEAT MSO. It stands for sewage, water, electricity, academics like schools, trash collection, medical access, safety, police, fire, and other basic services.
So the basics of modern life.
The basics. And the argument is, this isn't just good governance. It's framed as a sophisticated counterinsurgency strategy, an institutional setup designed to ensure compliance.
How does that work? We need these things.
Of course we do. But the deal, according to this analysis, is that we as workers surrender our surplus labor value in exchange for this basic infrastructure.
Okay, let's pause there. Surplus labor value. That's key Marxist jargon. Can we break that down simply?
Definitely. Think about your workday. Let's say it's 8 hours. The value you create in maybe the first 2 or 3 hours covers your wages, the cost of materials, the office rent, all the overheads.
Okay. Makes sense.
The value you create in the remaining 5 or 6 hours, that's the surplus value. It's value you created, but you don't get paid for it directly. It goes to the owner, the shareholders, as profit.
So it's like unpaid labor time,
Yeah.
stolen time.
That's exactly how workers often experience it. That feeling of, I work so hard, but where does all the money go? That surplus, that profit extracted from your unpaid time is what funds the system, including, ironically, the sweat MSO apparatus.
So the system uses the value we create in our extra hours to provide just enough stability, roads, water, schools, hospitals, to keep us functioning, to keep us able to show up to work tomorrow and create more surplus value.
That's the core of the bargain described here. It provides just enough to ensure the reproduction of the workforce and minimize mass unrest. We get basic survival infrastructure, and the system gets our compliance and our surplus labor.
And the things we think give us agency voting, patriotism, the flag, the sources say these obscure that fundamental economic reality that we're essentially conscripted.
Correct. They're presented as part of the ideological superstructure that masks the economic base. The illusion of choice and belonging hides the underlying economic compulsion.
So recognizing this deal, this trade-off, my basic security for my surplus labor and my compliance, that's the first step out of nihilism. Seeing the structure for what it is.
According to these sources, yes. It's about waking up to the terms of the contract you never explicitly signed, understanding why things feel the way they do.
And the rogue cell you mentioned earlier, the mass shooter, that's when this pacification fails.
It's presented as the catastrophic failure of this apparatus, a horrific, individualistic, destructive implosion when the pressure becomes too much and the alienation absolute. Their violence is a desperate, distorted attempt to shock a system they feel completely powerless within.
But there's another option, the revolutionary countercell.
Right. That's the potential within you, the listener.
No.
To respond not with implosion, but with consciousness. To use that awareness of the system to build something creative, collective, and humane instead of destructive.
Okay, if the system itself, the capitalist structure, is the root problem, why don't the solutions we usually hear about liberal reforms, regulations, voting for the right people, why don't they fundamentally fix it? This is a major critique in these texts.
It is. The core argument across these sources is that liberalism, in its various forms, from classical to modern, is historically and structurally bound to capitalism. It emerged alongside it. It manages it.
Manages it how?
By offering concessions, reforms, extending rights, which is often crucial and hard-won through struggle, let's be clear. But the critique goes, it only does so to the extent necessary to stabilize the system, to prevent a more fundamental revolutionary challenge.
So it's like a pressure valve, letting off just enough steam to keep the engine from exploding.
That's a good analogy. It's described as the ideology of compromise from above. It manages discontent without threatening the core power structures, private ownership of the means of production, the accumulation imperative.
You mentioned the bakery analogy earlier. Liberalism might argue about the size of the slice of pie everyone gets, but it never questions who owns the bakery, who controls how the pies are made and distributed in the first place.
Exactly. It promises rights without fundamentally redistributing power. It talks about freedom, but often a freedom constrained by economic necessity for the majority. The sources explicitly call it a brake on historical change.
A break? How so?
By creating the illusion of progress. The idea that society is slowly, gradually getting better, addressing injustices piece by piece without needing a fundamental overhaul of the economic system.
And this illusion, the sources argue, actually prevents more radical change.
Yes, because it occupies the space of reasonable opposition. It positions itself as the sensible alternative to the status quo, thereby marginalizing calls for deeper structural transformation from the genuine left. It keeps the left from being seen as the primary force challenging the system.
And the result of that, when these incremental changes inevitably fall short or get rolled back?
Profound disappointment. Disillusionment. Especially among working class and marginalized communities who bear the brunt of the system's failures. And that disappointment, that feeling of being let down by the sensible center, that creates fertile ground for reactionary movements, for fascism.
People feel like the system is rigged, liberalism isn't delivering, so they look for something, anything, that promises radical change, even if it's destructive.
Precisely. The sources provide historical examples to back this up. It's presented as a recurring pattern.
Like in the 1960s.
Exactly. Look at LBJ's Great Society. Huge, important reforms, no doubt. But they were implemented alongside the massive, costly, and morally devastating Vietnam War. The spending priorities, the compromises, the sense that the establishment was still fundamentally committed to empire, this created an opening.
An opening for Nixon.
An opening Richard Nixon exploited brilliantly in 1968. He appealed to the silent majority, stoked white backlash against civil rights gains, and promised law and order, basically, cracking down on the very movements demanding deeper change. The liberal compromise created the vacuum he filled.
And we saw a similar pattern more recently.
The sources point to the Obama years. The 2008 financial crisis happens. The decision is made to bail out Wall Street with massive public funds, while relief for ordinary homeowners facing foreclosure, for workers facing wage stagnation, was far more limited, more means-tested.
That created resentment, a feeling that the elites look after their own.
A deep resentment. And that allowed figures like Donald Trump campaigning against the swamp and the establishment to tap into that populist anger, even though his own policies ultimately benefited the wealthy. The perceived failures or compromises of the center-left empowered the far right.
And the sources see this playing out even now.
They do. They point to current debates, for instance, around foreign policy decisions. The example given is the administration's stance on the Israel-Gaza conflict. When liberal leadership seems to prioritize geopolitical alliances or strategic interests over stated commitments to human rights.
It alienates the base, especially younger voters, progressives.
Profoundly. It creates a sense of betrayal, of moral compromise at the heart of the establishment. And this disillusionment, again, potentially strengthens the appeal of an oppositional right-wing figure who promises to smash the system, regardless of the consequences.
So the pattern is liberal caution, designed to protect the system, inadvertently protects the conditions that the right then openly exploits.
That's the core critique. The demand from this perspective isn't just for better liberal policies. It's for liberals to essentially get out of the way, to stop acting as gatekeepers of hierarchy and allow a real structural challenge from the left to emerge.
This connects to a specific critique in the sources about a current trend, the abundance agenda. What's that about?
Right. This is the idea, popular in some liberal and tech circles, that our main problems, housing shortages, climate change, etc., aren't caused by capitalism itself, but by chosen scarcities. Bad regulations, inhibitionism, inefficient government.
So the solution is just build more stuff, more housing, more green energy, faster, like a supply-side progressivism.
Exactly. Streamline regulations, unleash innovation, build, build, build. It sounds very pragmatic, very solution-oriented.
It does. What's the critique?
The Marxian analysis presented in these sources sees this as an ideological intervention, a way to deflect anger away from capitalism's core logic, the profit motive, and towards technical fixes. Fix the zoning, not the system that makes housing profitable only when it's scarce for many.
So it focuses on the superstructure, the rules and regulations, instead of the economic base who owns things and why they're produced.
Precisely. It avoids the fundamental question: why, in a world of unprecedented wealth, is there still desperate scarcity in basic necessities like affordable housing, while we have an absurd overabundance of luxury goods, empty investment properties, planned obsolescence?
Because the system produces for profit, not for human need. That's the core contradiction again.
Exactly. The sources bring in commodity fetishism here. That's Marx's idea that under capitalism, we start treating commodities, things, as if they have inherent, almost magical value in themselves.
You forget the human labor that went into them.
We forget the labor, and more importantly, we forget the social relations of production. We see a housing crisis as a problem of not enough houses, the things, rather than a problem of a system where land and housing are treated primarily as financial assets for generating rent and profit, not as fundamental human rights.
So focusing on just building more, while maybe necessary, misses the point if the underlying system still prioritizes profit over need. We could build millions of homes, but if they're all luxury condos or owned by investment funds, it doesn't solve the crisis for ordinary people.
That's the argument, and this ties back to alienation too. Even if, hypothetically, AI and automation gave us all much shorter work weeks, as some abundance proponents suggest.
Sounds good.
It does. But if production is still organized around profit and private ownership, alienation persists. Your remaining work hours are still commodified. Your free time might increase, but your fundamental relationship to your labor, to society, to your own creative potential remains alienated if it's not geared towards genuine human flourishing.
So true abundance isn't just more stuff. It's a different way of organizing society, where people's needs and potential come before profit.
That's the structural view presented. Abundance means liberating human potential, not just accumulating more commodities within the same alienated system.
Okay, so we have this cycle. Alienation leading to system crises, met by liberal compromises that ultimately fail, creating openings for fascism. That's the endpoint of despair in this analysis. How do the sources define fascism in this context?
Crucially, it's not seen as something totally alien or external. It's framed as democracy's own crisis. Almost like an autoimmune response, the system attacking itself when its internal contradictions become unbearable.
So it grows out of the failures of the existing system.
Yes. It's described as what happens when people have fundamentally given up on hope for change through existing channels. They're tired of the struggle, tired of the compromises, tired of feeling powerless. Fascism arrives, promising a clean break, a total solution, a rebirth. but it's the final evolution of despair hung in the robes of rebirth.
It takes the legitimate anger and desire for change
The revolutionary fire, the Promethean energy, as the sources put it.
and turns it destructive, but directs it inwards.
Exactly. It hands that fire to one specific in-group and tells them to use it to burn bridges, books, and bodies. It directs the anger towards scapegoats, minorities, immigrants, political opponents, instead of towards the ruling class or the structure of capital itself. It offers a false sense of power through exclusion and violence.
How does this connect back to the individual listener's struggle? That feeling of meaninglessness or being stuck.
The sources use the Icarus metaphor here. You remember Icarus flying too close to the sun?
Just sort of wings melted, fell into the sea, hubris.
Right. But the analysis here says the failure wasn't necessarily trying to fly, seeking something higher, challenging limits. That's human. The failure was forgetting how to land.
How to land.
Land with humility, with memory of where you came from, with connection to the collective, to the earth, essentially. Icarus's fatal flaw in this reading was flying alone, seeking individual glory, separating himself from the community, from shared purpose.
So when we feel isolated in our struggle, especially if our identity already puts us outside the mainstream queer, non-binary, bipolar, and artists, that loneliness makes us vulnerable.
Very vulnerable. Vulnerable either to sinking into nihilism, nothing matters anyway,
True.
or potentially susceptible to the false promises of reactionary movements that offer a strong exclusionary identity. Join us, hate them, and you'll belong.
And this isolation, this feeling of being cursed or unlucky, is reinforced by ideology.
Absolutely. The sources use a really powerful analysis of the novel Holes. Remember Stanley Yelnats and his family's curse?
Yeah, the no-good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather.
Exactly. But the story brilliantly reveals the curse isn't magic. It's material. It's generational poverty stemming from historical injustice. It's systemic racism. It's the carceral state. Camp Green Lakes is essentially a privatized prison exploiting youth labor.
So the warden isn't just mean, she's literally profiting from their digging, looking for treasure stolen generations ago by her ancestor, the racist landowner who cheated Stanley's ancestor.
Precisely. The myth of the curse is ideology doing its job. It's a story told to the oppressed Stanley's family, the boys at the camp, to make them believe their suffering is fate, or their own fault, rather than the result of theft and structural violence.
And fascism uses similar myths, like the myth of pure meritocracy.
Exactly. Fascism weaponizes those liberal myths. If you just worked harder, those other people are lazy. It masks the reality of systemic extraction, just like the warden masks her treasure hunt as character building for the boys. If you fail, it's your fault, your curse, not the rigged game.
So, breaking the curse, fighting nihilism, it starts with seeing through the myth, with a shift in consciousness.
That's the crucial first step. Realizing that the alienation, the feeling of being cursed, is not a personal failing, but an accurate reflection of a broken structure. That breakdown can become a breakthrough.
But the sources add a really difficult caveat here, don't they? About the illusion of revolution.
They do. It's a tough but important point. It's easy, especially if you feel marginalized or critical of the system, say, as an artist or someone whose identity challenges norms, to feel like you're somehow outside the system.
Right.
Morally pure, untainted.
Like, I'm not part of that.
Right. But the sources argue that's a dangerous illusion. True revolutionary consciousness, they say, begins with the courage to hold two seemingly contradictory truths at the same time.
Okay, what are they?
First, I was victimized. The system is unjust. My marginalization, my pain, it's real and it's structural. Fully acknowledging that. And second, my need to survive within this system, my compliance, my silence at times, my fear. It played a part, however small, in the mechanism of my own victimization and the system's continuation.
Wow, that's heavy. It's not about blame, though.
Not about blame or guilt in a paralyzing way. It's about accepting agency. Recognizing that even in an oppressive system, we make choices, we participate, we survive. And acknowledging that complicity, however unwilling, is necessary to truly understand how the system works and how to change it from within.
So the purpose isn't found by pretending we're completely separate heroes fighting an external evil.
No. The purpose, as defined here, is found in the incredibly difficult work of redeeming a material self we know is complicit. It's about transforming our participation from passive compliance into active resistance, right where we are.
That's the internal fire. Accepting responsibility not for the system's existence, but for our role within it and using that understanding to fuel change.
Exactly. You stop waiting for salvation from outside and start the real messy work of building power and meaning inside the struggle with others who are doing the same.
Okay, so once we have that difficult self-awareness, that structural diagnosis, how do we move forward? The sources talk about the revolutionary countercell emerging from alienation itself.
Right. The idea is that the system, by creating alienation, also creates its own gravediggers, so to speak. That feeling of disconnect generates a deep human need for connection, for meaning, for agency. That latent potential is the countercell.
And how do we activate it? How do we move from theory to action? There's a geometric analogy used in the sources.
Yeah, it's quite useful. Think of the political spectrum, left wing, right wing, as two rays shooting out from a single point, a vertex.
Okay.
Usually political debate focuses on moving along those rays, shifting policies left or right, winning elections, reformism.
Right.
But this analysis says the real target isn't the rays. It's the vertex itself, that common point from which both left and right emerge.
And the vertex is?
The vertex is capitalism's material base, the fundamental structure of ownership, production, and the contradictions it inevitably produces: exploitation, alienation, inequality, violence.
So the goal isn't just to push the system leftward, it's to fundamentally change the starting point, to transform the material conditions that create the problems in the first place.
Exactly. Revolutionizing the vertex, changing the economic foundation of society. That's the deeper goal.
And that requires solidarity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The sources are emphatic about this. If the bad guys, capital fascism reactionaries, thrive on dividing people, race, class, gender, sexuality, nationality, then the necessary medicine is the opposite. It's egalitarian, reflexive, humble solidarity.
Egalitarian meaning equal, reflexive meaning.
Self-aware, constantly examining our own biases, our own privileges within the movement. Humble meaning recognizing we don't have all the answers, learning from each other's struggles.
And the goal is defined as we are many and one acting as one. How does that differ from other political models?
Well, the sources contrast it with, say, a top-down authoritarian model where it's many acting as one under rigid control.
Yeah.
Or a fragmented liberal model, often seen as each one acting as many, where individuals pursue their own goals or identities without strong collective cohesion.
So many and one acting as one means unity and diversity. Collective power built from acknowledging difference but finding common ground in the struggle against the system.
That's the idea, building power that doesn't replicate the hierarchies we're trying to dismantle.
Okay, let's get concrete. The sources outline an insurgency plan. Specific steps for building meaning, finding purpose through action, especially for someone listening who maybe feels marginalized already.
Right. Step 1. Build an inclusive coalition. This is crucial. For the listener navigating life as, say, queer, non-binary, bipolar, an artist, your very existence often challenges the system's norms around productivity, identity, conformity.
Your life is already political.
Inherently political. The sources insist that you cannot separate the fight against economic exploitation, class struggle, from the fight against oppression, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism. A true left coalition must link these struggles. Liberation for one group has to mean liberation for all. The strength comes from that intersectionality.
Okay. Second step.
Political education. This is about raising consciousness, countering the mainstream narrative that anything beyond mild reform is impossible or dangerous. It means actively educating ourselves and our communities about how the system works.
History, economics.
Yeah, historical materialism, the history of capitalism, class struggle, imperialism, understanding why things are the way they are, why incremental change often fails, why the far right offers false solutions. This shared understanding is presented as the bedrock of rebellion. It turns confusion into clarity, isolation into shared analysis.
Third.
Tie reform to transformation. This is about fighting for immediate improvements while building towards deeper change. Think democratic socialist demands: universal health care, free education, affordable housing, worker cooperatives, strong unions.
Things that make life better now.
Exactly. But frame them not as nice-to-haves or moral ideals, but as material necessities for survival, for dignity. Winning these reforms reduces people's vulnerability, makes them less susceptible to despair or right-wing appeals, and it demonstrates that collective action actually works. It builds momentum and revolutionary potential.
Okay, what's next? Fourth point.
This wasn't explicitly labeled fourth in the Outlines plan section, but drawing from the critique of liberalism, a key element is institutionalizing accountability. Instead of just hoping good people get elected, the focus is on building structures that force accountability.
Like what?
Things like real democratic control over institutions, debt cancellation, wealth taxes, capital controls to stop corporations from just leaving when workers demand rights. Measures that fundamentally shift power, not just rely on the goodwill of elites. Restoring faith that the system can be made to serve people, not just profit.
And the final point from the plan.
International solidarity. This is absolutely critical in these anti-imperialist sources. They argue that the struggle of the working class and oppressed people is global. Capital is global, so resistance must be too.
So, supporting movements abroad isn't separate from fighting for justice at home.
It's seen as inseparable. Supporting anti-war movements, anti-occupation struggles, workers' rights campaigns in other countries. It's recognizing that the same forces of capital and empire oppressing people elsewhere are fundamentally linked to the forces oppressing us here. Fighting for Palestinian liberation, for example, is framed as directly connected to fighting for racial and economic justice in the U.S. It's one struggle against a global system.
This sounds like a lifetime of struggle, an ongoing process. How do you maintain hope? The sources talk about a revolutionary revelation.
Yeah, it draws on almost biblical or allegorical language to frame the long-term view. The idea is that the history of humanity is the history of class struggle. It's an eternal cycle. The oppressed symbolizes the lamb, the marginalized, the exploited, constantly rise up to expose the corruption and violence of the ruling system, symbolizes the Antichrist, representing capital, empire, the bourgeoisie.
So the struggle itself is the meaning. The revelation isn't a single event, but the ongoing process of fighting for justice.
Exactly. And the faith required isn't in a guaranteed victory tomorrow, but in the righteousness and necessity of the struggle itself. The belief that collective action, consciousness, solidarity, that these can lead to periods of greater justice, of human flourishing, what the text called the millennium, understood metaphorically as achieving socialism, a more just society.
So, purpose restored. Our fight isn't just about survival. It's about realizing our full potential as human beings, together.
That's the ultimate aim. We become, as the sources dramatically put it, the saints of the mundane, the angels of the absurd. Our everyday acts of resistance, connection, creation, especially for those whose very being defies the system's logic, become part of this larger historical movement. Your art, your identity, your struggle with mental health within this system. It's all imbued with revolutionary potential when connected to collective action.
So let's bring it right back down to the listener. What does all this mean for you right now? Feeling overwhelmed maybe, but maybe also a little bit hopeful. It means that feeling of alienation, that disconnect. It's not your weakness, it's your superpower in a way. It's your accurate perception of a broken system. And that perception is the starting point for agency. Your differences aren't flaws. They're the cracks where the light gets in, where new possibilities can grow.
The immediate work, then, is practical. The sources break it down. Support the revolutionaries, those already fighting, demanding radical change. Amplify their voices. Lend your support. Persuade the cautious. Talk to people. Share information. Use education and action to show them that sticking with the status quo is riskier than fighting for something better. And block the entrenched. Organize effectively to challenge those who hold power and benefit from the current system. Disrupt their ability to maintain control.
So it's about making a conscious choice. To stop seeing yourself as just a victim or a bystander and start seeing yourself as an agent. An agent of this counter logic, aligning your personal journey, your art, your healing, your relationships with the collective struggle for a more human world.
Yeah. Think of society as your current playground. Look around. Does it feel fair? Is it fun? Is it safe for everyone? Probably not. Now, imagine the playground you want to play in. One based on cooperation, creativity, mutual support.
Okay.
Then, the purpose becomes figuring out, with others, how to build that new playground. It takes imagination, courage, maybe failing a few times, finding friends. As one source puts it, maybe you just need a friend and the courage to suck for a while as you learn.
The purpose isn't finding a perfect ideology or waiting for a leader. It's the messy work of building solidarity and changing things from within.
Breaking the cycle from within. Not just swapping out the priest, but dethroning the god capital and ending its ritualistic violent feast.
And the final, really provocative thought these sources leave us with ties it all together, the personal, the local, the global.
It's a stark reminder about that international solidarity. We can't afford to see struggles elsewhere as separate from our own. The sources are incredibly direct here. One passage reads, essentially, a change is coming. But understand this. What the powerful are doing to our Palestinian comrades, they are already doing to us. Not also doing it to us, already doing it.
Wow. So The violence and dispossession we see far away are just more visible manifestations of the same logic operating right here, maybe more subtly for some, but just as destructively.
That's the urgent message. Global injustice isn't over there. It's the mirror image of our own situation, fueled by the same systems. Recognizing that connection, acting on that solidarity that's presented as the ultimate foundation for a purpose strong enough to withstand nihilism and truly rebuild from the ruins.
So the work starts now. Consciousness, commitment, collective action, creating meaning together one day at a time.
We are the architects. Let's build something better.